The year was 1973. The city was Moscow. The air, even in the thaw of détente, was thick with the gray, metallic chill of suspicion. This was the world of Elena Ivanovna Volkova. On paper, she was a privileged citizen of the Soviet Union. She possessed an apartment, albeit a modest one-room flat in the Cheryomushki district, far from the grandeur of the city center. She had access to Beryozka shops, the special stores stocked with Western goods, a privilege afforded to her by her profession. Elena was a senior translator for the 8th Chief Directorate of the KGB. Her domain was language, specifically the technical and diplomatic nuances of American English. She was not a field agent, not one of the illegals living under deep cover in the West. She was, in the bureaucratic parlance of the Lubyanka, a vital cog in the great machine of state security. Elena was 32 years old, unmarried, a status that drew quiet scrutiny from her department's personnel officer. Her life was a study in constrained precision. She woke at 06 gaz, boiled water for kasha, and drank her tea black. She took the metro, her face settling into the requisite mask of communal indifference, and presented her red propusk, pass, to the stone-faced guard at the Yasenevo headquarters. Her days were spent in a sterile, sound-dampened room, headphones clamped over her ears, translating reams of intercepted documents, technical manuals, and diplomatic cables. She was gifted. She understood not just the words but the intent, the cultural subtext, the regional colloquialisms, the subtle arrogance of American power that bled through even the most mundane reports. Her supervisor, Major Viktor Baranov, a man whose face seemed permanently carved from gray granite, called her the asset. It was not a compliment. It was a classification. Thomas Tom Vance was the other half of the equation, though he did not know it. At 29, he was a second secretary, Cultural Affairs, at the American Embassy on Tchaikovsky Street. This title was a thin veneer. To the KGB, Cultural Affairs was a known euphemism for the CIA. Vance was, in fact, a junior operations officer for the agency, working under the cover of diplomatic immunity. His job was to make contacts, to assess potential assets, and to exist as a clean face for the embassy. He was charismatic in a way that Americans often were, a wide smile, an easy laugh, and a disarming fluency in literary Russian. He was also, by his very nature, a target. The KGB's 2nd Chief Directorate, Counterintelligence, had a file on him 3 inches thick before his plane ever touched down at Sheremetyevo. Their worlds were designed to be parallel, to run alongside each other like the tracks of a train, but never to touch. He was the enemy, the potential protivnik. She was the guardian, the mechanism of the state. The system, however, had a flaw. It required human beings to operate it. And human beings, even in 1973 Moscow, were susceptible to the unquantifiable variables of connection. The Cold War was a war of systems, but this case study would become a story of human fallibility, of loyalty divided, and of a risk so profound it defied all political logic. It began not with a clandestine meeting, but at an official, state-sanctioned reception, where the air was heavy with imported champagne and the silent, watchful gaze of countless observers. The reception was held at Spaso House, the residence of the American ambassador, in November 1973. The event was a carefully orchestrated piece of diplomatic theater, celebrating a new exhibit of American graphic art. Elena Volkova was not there as a guest. She was on duty. Her assignment, per Major Baranov, was passive observation and linguistic support. This meant standing near high-value Soviet officials, listening to their interactions with the Americans, and providing a verbatim report of any nuances the surveillance microphones might miss. She wore her best dress, a simple dark blue wool garment, and nursed a single glass of Sovetskoye Shampanskoye for 2 hours. Thomas Vance was working the room, his role as cultural attaché on full display. He was fluent, charming, and self-deprecating, discussing the merits of Rockwell versus the socialist realism of Dynica. Elena observed him from a distance. He was a professional target, nothing more. Her report would note his ease with Minister Gromyko's aid, his careful avoidance of a known dissident artist, and his precise, slightly accented Russian. The first sign, the initial deviation from protocol, was microscopic. As the crowd thinned, Vance found himself near Alina, who was studying a garish, abstract lithograph. "It's supposed to represent freedom," he said in Russian, gesturing to the print. "It looks more like a traffic accident to me." Alina's training was to nod politely and move away. Instead, she found herself replying, "Or perhaps," she said, not looking at him. "It represents a system collapsing under the weight of its own colors." Vance turned, genuinely surprised. He had expected a polite platitude. He saw her face, intelligent and severe. He switched to English. "You're a critic, then?" Alina's gaze flickered to the cultural attaché from the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MID, standing 10 feet away. "I am a translator," she said, her English perfect, unaccented. "I translate what I see." Before he could reply, she excused herself and melted back into the crowd. That night, Alina filed her contact report. She detailed the conversation with the MID attaché. She detailed the ambient noise. She included Vance's joke about the traffic accident. She did not include her own reply. It was a tiny omission, a grain of sand inside the complex machinery. It was the first secret. Their subsequent encounters were just as brief, dictated by the official calendar. A trade delegation meeting, a screening of a Soviet film. Each time, a brief, sterile exchange. "Mr. Vance." "Ms. Volkova." The real early sign was not the conversation, but what followed. A week later, Alina found a worn paperback copy of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five in her locker at the translation department. There was no note. It was not a banned book, but it was certainly unofficial. She should have reported it immediately. It was a clear attempt at compromise, a classic agency softening technique. She held the book. She could feel the faint warmth of her locker room. She smelled the acidic paper. She thought of the line about the traffic accident. Instead of reporting it, she slipped the book into her bag and took it home. That night, she read it, and for the first time in her adult life, she felt a profound, dangerous, and utterly human sense of complicity. The relationship, if it could be called that, developed with the glacial, dangerous pace of a polar ice pack. It was a relationship built on inference, not interaction. They had no clandestine meetings in Gorky Park. They wrote no impassioned letters. Theirs was a communion of shared risk, conducted in the peripheral vision of the Soviet state. A book left on a metro seat. A knowing half-second glance across the Bolshoi theater. A shared appreciation for the absurd. A gallows humor that only those living inside the grand, tragic farce could understand. Alina told herself it was an operational exercise. She was handling a potential asset, learning his mind. Tom, for his part, was baffled. He had found an anomaly, a KGB officer who understood irony. The discovery that changed everything was not, in the end, about them. It was about the system itself. In early 1974, Alina was assigned a priority translation. The file was designated Osoboye Znaczenie, Special Importance, and codenamed Operation Ovid. It was a desinformatia campaign, a complex and cynical piece of KGB artistry. Alina's role was to translate the props, a series of fabricated technical documents concerning new Soviet submarine-launched ballistic missile (SLBM) capabilities. These documents were designed to be stolen by a U.S. asset, but they contained subtle, profound flaws that would lead American analysts to a wildly incorrect and destabilizing conclusion about Soviet first strike intentions. As she worked, Alina felt a professional's admiration. The lies were exquisite, layered with verifiable truths. But as she cross-referenced the technical specifications, she felt a cold knot in her stomach. The distribution list for the desinformatia was specific. The discovery of the false data was being channeled toward a specific branch of the U.S. intelligence apparatus in Moscow. Then she found the second file. This one was not for her to translate. It was a background file on the target of the operation. Not the U.S. government, but the man they intended to discover the information. The file was 77B. The target was Thomas Vance. The plan was clear. The KGB would allow Vance to make contact with a supposed high-level Soviet traitor. This traitor would pass him the Ovid documents. Vance, believing he had the scoop of a lifetime, would transmit them to Langley. The The KGB would then arrest the traitor and simultaneously leak evidence to the Americans that Vance's source was a KGB-controlled double agent all along. The intended consequence was twofold. First, the false SLBM data would enter the U.S. intelligence stream. Second, and more importantly, Thomas Vance's career would be terminated. The CIA would believe he was either a gullible fool or, worse, a knowing participant in a Soviet desinformatia campaign, a double agent. He would be destroyed, professionally and personally, by his own side. Alina stared at the typewritten words. This was not espionage. It was a character execution. The system she served was not just defending the motherland. It was actively, coldly, and impersonally arranging the complete destruction of a man who had given her a copy of Slaughterhouse-5. She looked at the file, then at the clock. She had 48 hours before the operation was scheduled to go active. The discovery was not that her lover was in danger. It was that her government was the author of a tragedy, and she was translating the script. The moment Alina closed File 77B, the oppressive, gray reality of Moscow changed. The surveillance had always been a theoretical concept, an ambient noise she had learned to ignore, like the rumble of the metro far below the city. Now it was a physical presence. The system she worked for was not just an abstract ideology, it was an eye, and she had just become acutely aware of its gaze. Her knowledge was a physical weight. It made her walk differently. It made her speak differently. She left the Yasenevo complex at 17 and precisely as she always did. But as she walked to the metro station, she was conscious of the Tapatuni, the walkers or stompers of the Second Chief Directorate, the men in their identical gray coats and hats whose job was to follow. Was the man reading Pravda by the kiosk the same man from yesterday? Was the babushka sweeping the steps of the apartment building really just a janitor? Or was she a nablюдатель, observer, logging the comings and goings? Paranoia became her new operational procedure. She returned to her apartment and checked the seals, tiny invisible hairs she had placed on her drawers, her books, the back of her radio. They were all intact. But did that mean she was safe? Or did it mean her watchers were simply better than she was? She turned on the radio to a broadcast of Tchaikovsky, the standard masking sound, and inspected her telephone. The click on the line she had always dismissed as faulty wiring now sounded like the intake of breath from a third-party listener. Her training provided the framework for her fear. She knew the methods. She knew about the listeners, the auditors in a basement miles away who could be listening to her run water in the sink. She knew about the vehicle-mounted observation posts disguised as bread trucks or maintenance vans. And she knew that her own office was a fortress of surveillance. Major Baranov, her superior, was not just a manager. He was her keeper. His casual questions. "Did you enjoy the film screening, Alina Ivanovna? You seemed distracted," were no longer office chatter. They were data-gathering probes. Alina also understood, with a terrifying new clarity, that Tom Vance was living in a parallel state of observation. As an American diplomat, he was under constant, overt surveillance by the KGB's Sluzhba service. A ZIL sedan would be parked outside the embassy, following his car. His apartment at the American compound was certainly wired, but he was also being watched by his own side. The CIA station chief, Arthur, would be monitoring his own people for any sign of compromise or going native. Tom was trapped between two competing, all-encompassing surveillance states. He was a fly being watched by two spiders. This chapter of Alina's life was defined by this oppressive, absolute awareness. She had to translate the final Ovid documents, her hands steady, her terminology precise, all while knowing she was building the very trap she now desperately needed to disarm. She was under surveillance by the KGB, and she was now, in her own mind, conducting surveillance on herself, policing every thought, every micro-expression, lest she give away the one secret that now mattered. The confrontation was not with the state, nor was it with Thomas Vance. It was an internal, silent battle waged by Alina Volkova against her own ingrained fear and training. The Ovid operation was 24 hours from activation. The traitor was in place. The false documents, perfectly translated by Alina herself, were ready. Vance was scheduled to attend a reception at the Czechoslovakian embassy, a perfect neutral ground location where the contact would be made. Alina had to act, and she had to do it in a way that would not be traced back to her and would not confirm to the Americans why he was being warned. She could not call him. The lines were compromised. She could not send a note. It was amateurish and traceable. She could not meet him. To do so would be an immediate confession, resulting in her arrest and his expulsion. She needed a vector, a blind spot in the joint KGB-CIA surveillance net. She found it in the most public of places, the Bolshoi Theater. It was a propaganda-fueled irony. The Bolshoi was a known spy swap location, a place where observers from all sides watched each other watch the ballet. Both the US and Soviet intelligence services used the intermissions to observe contacts, to gauge moods. It was so obvious that it was, in its own way, secure. Everyone was watching the known players. No one would be watching a mid-level translator who was supposed to be there. Alina requested a last-minute ticket to that night's performance of Giselle. Her request was logged by her department, a permissible, if slightly unusual perk. Vance, she knew from the embassy's social calendar, which her department monitored, was not scheduled to be there. This was her gamble. He wouldn't be there, but someone from the US Embassy's political section would be. During the first intermission, the grand foyer filled with officials and their wives, diplomats, and the watchful men in gray suits. Alina moved through the crowd. She saw him, James Hackett, the third secretary, a junior officer known to be close to Vance. Alina moved accidentally past him, brushing his arm and spilling the contents of her small evening bag. A compact, a theater program, and a single unadorned cigarette pack, papyracy. "Oh, prostit," she murmured, bending down. Hackett, the polite American, bent to help her. His fingers brushed the cigarette pack as he handed it back. "No trouble," he said. Alina smiled, a brief, tight smile of a flustered citizen. "Thank you." She disappeared back into the crowd. It was a classic brush pass. Hackett, trained in this, would have felt the tiny, almost imperceptible piece of tape holding the pack closed in an unusual way. Back in the privacy of the men's room, he would open it. Inside, beneath the cardboard, Alina had placed a single piece of rice paper. On it, she had typed 3 words on a non-standard, unregistered typewriter she had borrowed from a university library. The words were not a direct warning. They were a trigger. Ovid, 77B, burn. Ovid was the operation's code name. 77B was the KGB file number for Vance. Burn was the instruction. It was a catastrophic breach of operational security. She had passed a state secret of the highest level. She had confirmed the existence of an active operation and its target. She returned to her seat for the second act, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. The confrontation was over. She had chosen. The dancers on stage seemed to be moving in slow motion, their tragedy pale and insignificant compared to the invisible, irreversible action she had just taken. The mechanism of state security, when disrupted, moves with alarming speed. Alina's warning, passed through Hackett, reached Thomas Vance within the hour. Vance, to his credit, understood the gravity. He did not, as the KGB had anticipated, meet the traitor at the Czechoslovakian embassy. Instead, he went straight to his station chief, Arthur, and reported a potential compromat operation, presenting the rice paper as evidence of a high-level breach. The American side did not understand the details, but they understood the danger. The Ovid codename meant nothing, but 77B and the abrupt warning was enough. Vance was immediately benched. The embassy went on electronic lockdown. The contact at the reception was left standing alone. For Major Baranov and the Second Chief Directorate, the failure was immediate and catastrophic. An operation years in the making had evaporated. The traitor was exposed. The target had been spooked. The hunt for the leak began instantly. Who knew about Ovid? A handful of officers. Who knew about File 77B? Even fewer. Who knew both? The list was agonizingly short, and on that list was the name of the operation's senior translator, Elena Ivanovna Volkova. The exposure was not dramatic. It was bureaucratic. Elena arrived at Yasenevo 2 days later. Her propusk was still valid. She sat at her desk, translating a dull agricultural report from an American Midwestern newspaper. The silence in her department was heavy, oppressive. Her colleagues avoided her gaze. They knew. Everyone knew approval, failure had occurred. At 11:03 a.m., Major Baranov's aide approached her desk. "Elena Ivanovna," the young lieutenant said, his voice carefully neutral. "The major requires your presence. Please bring your notebooks." Elena stood. She knew this was the end. She picked up her notebooks, the ones containing only the agricultural translations, and walked the long, pale green corridor to Baranov's office. He was not there. Instead, two men she did not recognize were waiting. They wore the civilian suits of the Internal Security Directorate. They were not walkers. They were investigators. "Elena Ivanovna Volkova?" the older one asked, though it was not a question. "You will come with us. There are some discrepancies in your reports that require clarification." There were no handcuffs. There was no raised voice. It was the quiet, terrifying efficiency of the system correcting an error. She was escorted from the building, not through the main entrance, but through a side door and into a black, unmarked Volga sedan. Her arrest was a simple bureaucratic transfer. She was no longer an asset of the 8th Directorate. She was now the property of the Investigations Department. As the car pulled away, she looked back at the imposing concrete building, a place that had defined her entire adult life. She felt nothing but a profound, cold sense of finality. The car was not heading toward her home. It was heading toward the notorious silhouette of Lefortovo prison. Lefortovo was not a place of physical brutality. It was an instrument of psychological dissolution. Built in the 19th century, its very architecture was designed to break the human spirit. Elena was processed. Her clothes, her shoes, her simple jewelry, all were taken. She was given a rough prison smock. She was assigned a number. She was placed in a camera cell that was cold, damp, and lit by a single bare bulb that was never turned off. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic clang of the guard's boot in the hallway and the scraping sound of the kormushka, the small feeding slot in the door. Her interrogator introduced himself only as the investigator. He was a pale, soft-spoken man in his 50s with hands that were meticulously clean. He was not Baranov. He was not a man of ideology. He was a man of procedure. The interrogations took place in a small, bare room, furnished with only a table and 2 chairs. "We know you are a patriot, Elena Ivanovna," he began, his voice calm, almost paternal. "We are not here to discuss your loyalty. We are here to discuss your mistake. A mistake of judgment." The method was simple. Isolation followed by relentless, circular questioning. She was kept awake for 20 hours at a time, then allowed to sleep for 2. The questions were always the same, delivered in the same monotonous tone. "Tell us about your relationship with Thomas Vance." "I had no relationship. He was an observation target. You translated File 77B. You were one of 7 people to see it. The operation failed 48 hours later. Explain this." "I cannot. I am a translator, not an analyst." "Why did you request a ticket to the Bolshoi?" "I enjoy the ballet." "Did you pass a communication to the American Hackett?" "I bumped into him. I spilled my bag. It was an accident. They played on her intelligence. They presented her with a choice. Elena Ivanovna, we know you did not do this for money. We know you are not a common spy. You were compromised, yes? Vance promised you things? A life in America? He preyed on your loneliness. Admit this, and the state can be merciful. We are interested in his methods, not your failure." This was the trap, the merciful confession. Elena's mind, honed by years of linguistic analysis, clung to the one thing they could not take, her own narrative. She refused to deviate. "I am a loyal officer of the state," she repeated, the words sounding hollow even to her. "The operation was compromised. I suggest you look at the other 6 people on that list." She turned their own paranoia back on them. She played the role of the insulted professional. "Or perhaps," she offered during one session, "the Americans simply have a source inside your department, investigator. It would be easier to blame a translator than to admit that, wouldn't it?" This earned her 48 hours in the Karzer, the cold cell, but it also planted a seed of doubt. They had no confession. They had no physical evidence of the Bolshoi pass. They had only circumstance, suspicion, and a catastrophic operational failure. The trial was a formality. A troika, a three-person military tribunal, convened in a closed room within Lefortovo itself. There was no defense attorney. The evidence was read. Her service record was noted. Her interrogator's report was submitted. Elena was asked if she had anything to say. She stood, thin and pale under the fluorescent lights. "I served the Soviet Union faithfully," she said. "I am innocent." The verdict was pre-written. Article 64, treason, in the form of betraying state secrets to a foreign power. But her refusal to confess, her status, and the lack of a smoking gun saved her from the highest measure. She was sentenced to 15 years in a corrective labor colony. Her case was closed. The ripples of Operation Ovid's failure spread far and fast, altering lives on both sides of the ideological divide. In Moscow, Thomas Vance's career was over. Within 24 hours of the failed operation, he was declared persona non grata by the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs for activities incompatible with his diplomatic status. He was given 48 hours to leave the country. He landed at Dulles Airport not as a hero who had dodged a bullet, but as a problem. The CIA debriefers at Langley were merciless. He had been the target of a major compromat operation. Why? Had he shown weakness? Had he been dangled a source? Why had the source of the warning, a KGB file number, come from so high up? The agency, in its institutional paranoia, could not decide if Vance was a fool who had been hopelessly compromised, or if he was, in fact, a witting participant in a dangling operation that he had bungled. The rice paper was a mystery. Ovid 77B. It was a warning from inside the KGB. The fact that a Soviet officer would risk everything to save him was incomprehensible. It did not fit their models. Unable to be trusted, Vance was put on the shelf. His clearance was maintained, but he was reassigned to a windowless office in Langley, tasked with analyzing Soviet agricultural reports. It was a slow, bureaucratic termination. He would spend the next decade in professional purgatory, his Moscow days a case study in career failure. For Elena Volkova, the consequences were more direct. She was transported by train to the Mordovian ASSR, to the sprawling, snowbound complex of camps known as Dubrovlag. Her life as an intellectual, a linguist, was over. She became a number, a zek. Her new reality was the sewing factory, a 10-hour day hunched over a machine, producing uniforms for the same army she had been convicted of betraying. The work was monotonous, the food was thin, and the cold was a constant companion. She was housed with other politicals, refuseniks, writers, and traitors like herself. She spoke little. Her linguistic skills were now a liability, a sign of a bourgeois past. She learned the rules of the camp: trust no one, show no weakness, and live only for the next bowl of kasha. The vibrant, complex woman who understood American irony was buried beneath the gray, padded telegraika of a prisoner. The political fallout was muted but significant. The Ovid incident was used by hardliners in both the Kremlin and Washington as proof that détente was a sham. It was a failure of intelligence, a failure of trust. The delicate process of SALT II negotiations hit a snag. The Cold War, which had briefly seemed to be thawing, grew a few degrees colder. The grand policies of nations were, as ever, hostage to the small, failed, and intensely human dramas played out in the shadows. Years dissolved into a decade. The Cold War, which had seemed a permanent, immutable state of being, began to crack. The Soviet Union, weighted by its own contradictions, was hemorrhaging. In 1988, under the new policies of glasnost and perestroika, a commission began reviewing the cases of political prisoners. Elena Volkova's name was on a long list. She had served 14 of her 15 years. Her rehabilitation was a simple stamp on a piece of paper. Her conviction overturned due to a lack of evidence. She was released in the winter of 1988, a 47-year-old woman, gaunt and silent, with hands permanently stained and scarred from the factory work. She was given a train ticket back to Moscow, a city she no longer recognized. The gray, monolithic capital she had left was now bursting with a chaotic, confusing energy. Cooperatives sold Western-style goods on the street. Young people argued politics openly in the squares. Her old apartment had been reassigned. She was given a room in a communalka, a communal flat, sharing a kitchen with 3 other families. She was a ghost in her own city. In Langley, Virginia, Thomas Vance was still at his desk. He was now a mid-level analyst, known in the cafeteria as Moscow Tom, a quiet, unmarried man who had seen his career peak at 29. He had never stopped thinking about the incident. He had never stopped wondering who had saved him and why. The file Ovid and 77B were burned into his memory. With the new openness, Vance began meticulously scanning the lists of rehabilitated political prisoners being published in the West. It took him 6 months, but he found her. Volkova, EI Translator, Article 64, sentenced 1974, released 1988. It was a name he had not allowed himself to think. The translator from the receptions, the woman with the sad, intelligent eyes, the woman who understood Vonnegut. It had been her. In 1989, just as the Berlin Wall was about to fall, Tom Vance took his accumulated vacation time and a large portion of his savings. He flew to Moscow as a tourist, one of thousands flocking to see the dying empire. He had no trouble finding her address. He stood outside the crumbling communal apartment building for an hour before going in. He found her in the kitchen, boiling potatoes. She looked at him, and there was no recognition at first. She was just an older woman, tired. "Elena," he said in Russian. She looked up. Her eyes, the only part of her he recognized, widened almost imperceptibly. He switched to English. "It was you." She did not invite him in. She just stood by the stove, the steam rising around her face. "You should not be here," she whispered. I had to," he stammered. "Why? Why did you do it?" Elena looked down at the peeling linoleum floor. She was silent for a long time. "They were building a cage for you," she said, her English still perfect but rusty, like a machine left in the rain. "They were using my words to build it. I stopped them. You saved my life," he said. "You lost everything." "I did not save you," Elena said, turning back to her potatoes. "I just ruined the plan. That is all. It was a long time ago." He wanted to say more. He wanted to thank her, to apologize, to explain that his life had been derailed as well. But he saw in her face that these words meant nothing. The legacy of their affair was not passion or romance. It was this: a ruined apartment, 2 spoiled lives, and the simple, terrible fact of her survival. He left a small bag of coffee, real American coffee, on the table and walked out. The case of Elena Volkova and Thomas Vance, as summarized in the now declassified File 77B, is a study in the failure of systems. From an analytical perspective, both the KGB and the CIA viewed the incident as a tactical and human intelligence disaster. The KGB's Ovid operation was a costly failure, compromised by an internal ideological breach. The CIA lost a promising officer to a cloud of suspicion from which he never recovered. Both agencies filed the case under lessons learned and moved on. But the historical reflection centers on a more ambiguous moral question. Elena Volkova was, by the legal definition of her time and place, a traitor. She violated Article 64. She broke her oath to the state and her service. She directly passed information of critical importance to a representative of a hostile foreign power. Her actions led to the failure of a major state security operation. From the perspective of Major Baranov, or the investigator at Lefortovo, her guilt was absolute. From a humanistic perspective, her action was one of profound and perhaps foolish moral courage. She was not acting as a spy for the Americans. She had no interest in their ideology. She was acting as an individual against a system she identified as corrupt. The Ovid operation was not defense. It was a cynical, destructive game designed to ruin a man for a minor geopolitical advantage. Elena's transgression was the introduction of a personal, ethical variable into a political equation. She saw a human being treated as an object, and she chose to intervene. The love element, which the title of such a story implies, is misleading. It was not a grand romance. It was, rather, a connection, an intellectual and ideological spark that illuminated, for Elena, the profound difference between the Rodina, motherland, she loved, and the Gosударство, state, she served. Thomas Vance was not her lover in a passionate sense. He was the catalyst who represented a world of ideas, of irony, of an individualism that her own system sought to crush. Ultimately, the story is not about love, nor is it about espionage. It is about the immense, crushing pressure of closed ideological systems and the catastrophic, unpredictable nature of a single human conscience. Elena Volkova's risk did not change the Cold War. It did not stop the arms race. It did not save the world. It saved one man from a specific bureaucratic termination, and in doing so, it cost her 14 years of her life. Her legacy is a testament to the fact that in the 20th century's great ideological conflict, the most dangerous and unpredictable front was, and always will be, the human heart. The system, whether in Moscow or Langley, could account for everything except the small, illogical, and profoundly human decision to say no.